A mysterious woman lures a businessman across state lines with the promise of a lucrative deal. When he vanishes, authorities turn to the FBI for help. Suspicions point to a bitter business rival, but the suspect stonewalls investigators. Agents would use state-of-the-art technology to find friends and lovers who might be willing to reveal the truth.
A wealthy businessman went to Florida to make one last deal before he retired, but he never returned home to his millions. Authorities examined who was closest to the victim and who stood to gain from his disappearance. But this time, conventional rules did not apply. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In a case that spanned the entire East Coast, agents would have to untangle a web of sex, money, and vengeance that led to murder.
Newark International Airport in New Jersey. On Saturday, February 24th, 1996, Kiwi Airlines Flight 45 took off for West Palm Beach, Florida. 58-year-old Frank Black was on board. Black owned and operated a successful school bus and transportation company in Andover, New Jersey.
Thank you.
He had made millions and was on his way to Florida to meet a new industry contact. Black told his family and co-workers he would be home Monday in time for another meeting. He also told them that his contact in Florida, a woman named Mia Giordano, was to pick him up at the airport. She would take him to meet others involved in the lucrative business deal. Privately, Black hoped to retire after closing the deal. When Black failed to return on Monday, his family contacted the New Jersey State Police. Detective Sergeant Lee Liddy was one of the state detectives assigned the missing persons case.
He was the kind of guy that he would always phone home. He always wanted to know what was going on with his business. He was a hands-on type of guy. Without Frank, the business really didn't run. And that's why they were concerned when they didn't hear from him. All of a sudden he disappeared, because Frank wasn't the kind of guy who would just walk away from his business.
New Jersey investigators interviewed Black's daughter, Leanna, and his girlfriend and office manager, Sally Roberts. Leanna said her father had missed an important meeting with her to discuss the sale of his business. He also had not answered calls to his cell phone. Sally Roberts recalled that the woman from Florida, Mia Giordano, had phoned the office many times recently but never left her number. The Florida woman claimed to represent a company named Valdez Exporting. Giordano provided a description of herself so Black could recognize her at the airport. She said she was 5'1" and blonde. A detective visited the travel agent who booked Black's trip.
Traveling, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The agent confirmed that Black purchased a one-way ticket to Florida. He didn't bother to rent a car since his contact had arranged to pick him up. Airline records corroborated that Black had boarded the flight. But he had not registered at any hotels upon his arrival in West Palm Beach. An examination of Black's records revealed that his credit cards had been used after his arrival in Florida. To follow the credit card trail, New Jersey detectives contacted the Fort Pierce office of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. FDLE Special Agent Michael Driscoll was assigned the case.
Frank Black's credit card was used at the Embassy Suites in Riviera Beach between approximately 1 in the morning and 2 in the morning. Okay? Now we're talking about from February 24th into February 25th. And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, his credit card, a different credit card, but Frank Black's credit card was used to purchase gas at a gasoline station in North Miami.
To investigators, this seemed odd since he hadn't rented a car. The state agent interviewed the employee who had worked on February 25th. When shown a photo of Black, the attendant said he didn't recognize him. The station's pumps all had credit card slots. No one would have had contact with Black or whoever was using his credit card. The employee didn't recall seeing anyone fitting Mia Giordano's description. Driscoll contacted the Florida Secretary of State Corporation Division to get an address for Valdez Exporting, Mia Giordano's company.
That looks real good. Okay, catch you later. Bye.
He found no such company registered in the state. He also attempted to locate Mia Giordano herself.
We did a very extensive search to identify any Mia Giordano in Florida, and we couldn't find any, I believe, any Mia Giordanos in Florida, or any that would even come remotely close. And we checked Florida as well as New Jersey, and with negative results.
On March 1st, a detective from the New Jersey State Police traveled to Florida where Frank Black's trail ended. Nobody had heard from Black in 5 days. Detectives now believed the millionaire had met with foul play. Their most likely suspect, a woman calling herself Mia Giordano, was untraceable. Investigators' focus turned to the phone calls Black received on the days leading up to his trip to Florida.
We obtained the phone records of Frank Black, which identified phone calls from a residence in Jupiter, and the residence in Jupiter was rented. It was a townhome rented by a girl identified as Lisa Costello.
She wasn't blonde, but she was 5'1". Mia Giordano had described herself as being exactly that height. The calls from Lisa Costello matched the times when Mia Giordano allegedly phoned Black to set up the meeting in Florida.
Mia Giordano was a fictitious figure. She never existed. And she was supposed to set up the deal with Frank Black. Mia Giordano was actually Lisa Costello.
Investigators took Costello's photo to the hotel where Black's credit card had been used on February 25th. The resort was on the Strip at Riviera Beach. The state agent asked to speak to the clerk who had been on duty the morning in question. While he waited, he checked the phone that had been used with Black's credit card. Like the gas pump, the phone required no signature from the customer, just a credit card. Anyone could have made the calls. Karen Voorhees had worked the front desk on the morning in question. But she did not recognize a photo of Frank Black. She did recall waiting on another customer that morning. At around 2 a.m., a dark-haired woman asked for a room. The hotel was booked, so she used a payphone several times to query other hotels. It was the same time Frank Black's credit card was used at the phone. Voorhees described the woman as being in her 30s with brown hair and standing a little over 5 feet tall. Driscoll showed Voorhees a photographic lineup of 6 women. Without hesitation, the clerk picked out Lisa Costello.
Lisa Costello was now really the primary suspect. I mean, we did have some evidence on her. That then we checked the car rental agencies by the West Palm Beach airport and found out that Lisa Costello rented a car just shortly before the time that Frank Black's flight arrived.
Investigators found the car at the airport rental lot. A subpoena allowed them to impound it for an evidence search by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. But examiners would find no trace of Frank Black in the car. There was no physical evidence linking Lisa Costello to the missing businessman. Florida investigators began covert surveillance on Lisa Costello. They followed the suspect for days to establish a routine and determine her contacts. They soon learned that Costello was dating a man named Alan Mackerly. Investigators began to tail Mackerly. Like Frank Black, he also owned a bus company in New Jersey, but was now living in Florida. The two men had known each other most of their lives.
Over the years, Alan Mackerly and Frank Black built up a rivalry. The two bus companies are about 10 miles apart. So even though they each had their own contracts and their own business, they were always vying for the same contracts in the same business.
Phone records indicated recent calls to Black from Mackerly's Florida home. This seemed strange since the two men were fierce rivals. Detectives went to speak with the manager of Black's bus company. Sally Roberts said Black and Mackerly used to be friends, but their business rivalry had made them enemies. She detailed the last time she had seen the men together. It was at an industry banquet in January of 1996. She and Frank were talking with friends when she saw Mackerly approaching. Angry that Black had stolen one of his major bus contracts, Mackerly threatened his rival.
He said he was going to get him and put him under. That could mean put him out of business, and it could also possibly mean he was going to kill him someday.
Black took the threat seriously. Afterwards, he wouldn't go to any meeting that Mackerly might attend unless he had someone with him. Investigators contacted Mackerly to ask him if he had seen or spoken to Frank Black recently. Mackerly flatly denied calling him in the days preceding Black's trip to Florida.
Him denying that and us knowing phone calls had been made from his house to Frank Black's business obviously indicated something was wrong.
Investigators believed that Mackerly and Costello had probably killed Frank Black, but they needed stronger proof. They turned to Assistant State Attorney Robert Belanger.
One of the first investigative tools that the FDLE wanted to use was wiretaps. So you have to show a really compelling reason for listening to someone's telephone conversations. So we drafted those applications and orders and obtained an order allowing us to listen to Alan Mackerly's telephone conversations.
Unfortunately, investigators heard very few phone conversations between Mackerly and Costello. This was because Costello was now living with Mackerly. If they were talking about Black's disappearance, it wasn't over the phone. In order to record any incriminating conversations, investigators would have to bug Mackerly's house. Assistant State Attorney Lawrence Merman hoped they had enough probable cause to get inside.
Being able to actually enter someone's home and plant a listening device is extremely restrictive, and the probable cause that's required is very high. The situations that would warrant that are very limited. This case actually presented that situation.
A judge signed the warrant, and investigators planted listening devices in Mackerly's home. They set up outside, watching and listening.
Got it.
Hopefully, the couple would discuss what happened to Frank Black.
Dirty condenser back here. This is safe.
Alan Mackerly and Lisa Costello were extremely cautious. Investigators believe the couple knew they were listening.
And every time that we would hear them starting to talk, they would turn the radio up in the kitchen loud. So we probably have several hundred hours of tapes with nothing but music on it.
Once again, investigators came up empty-handed.
Our Chief Assistant State Attorney, Dave Morgan, had even commented to me after we failed to get anything on the wiretaps, it looks like Alan Mackerly's gotten away with murder.
Alan, what are you doing?
With Black's body still missing, Mackerly and Costello could elude authorities as long as they maintained their silence. In June of 1996, Florida state agents believed that Alan Mackerly and his girlfriend Lisa Costello had murdered 58-year-old millionaire Frank Black. But investigators had little evidence against the couple, and Black's body was still missing. They checked morgues in Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade counties, where Black was last known to have traveled. There were no unidentified bodies matching Frank Black's description. If Mackerly and Costello had killed Black, they had covered their tracks well. Florida Department of Law Enforcement Special Agent Michael Driscoll expressed his frustration to his friend FBI Special Agent Jay Miller.
We used to play racquetball together, and he'd ask me about how this case was going, and I'd tell him, you know, a little bit about it, not a whole lot, and he'd say, well, if you ever need a hand, and I'd be happy to help out.
In June of 1996, Special Agent Jay Miller asked to be assigned the case out of the FBI's Fort Pierce resident agency.
Even though we were close friends, initially I did not know a lot of the details about Frank Black's disappearance. But as I could sense his frustration, I was able to elicit more information about the case, and we were able then to come to an understanding that we needed to look at this thing again from the start.
Though investigators believe Mackerly killed Black over a disputed busing contract, wiretaps and listening devices had failed to tie him to any crime. Investigators' best lead was still Black's alleged meeting with Costello. Perhaps if subpoenaed and confronted with the evidence, she would turn on Mackerly. It was a gamble that could jeopardize their entire case.
By giving anyone, in this case Lisa Costello, a subpoena, it compels her to come in and give information, and it gives her immunity. Hypothetically, if she came in and admitted she killed Frank Black, she would be immune from that statement. You could not use that statement against her.
On June 13th, 1996, Lisa Costello appeared before a Florida grand jury.
I'm not answering now.
When questioned by state attorneys, she was uncooperative and hostile. The judge cautioned her that if she did not answer, she would be jailed for contempt. Costello ignored his warnings. Investigators believed her refusal to cooperate confirmed she was involved in Black's disappearance. But it would take more than a hunch to solve the case. The gamble to subpoena Costello backfired. Now that Mackerly's closest ally was sitting behind bars, investigators had no potential witnesses to turn on the suspected murderer. Lacking further leads or physical evidence, the case against Mackerly might never make it to trial. Special Agent Michael Driscoll and his team were determined to keep this from happening.
We heard information that, let's just say from a confidential source, that there was a witness who wanted to talk but was concerned about, one, that witness's own involvement, and two, Alan Mackerly's violence. Felt that Alan Mackerly was a violent person and that maybe there'd be retaliation if this unknown and unidentified witness would talk.
That witness was Bill Anderson. A former Marine pilot, Anderson was one of Alan Mackerly's closest friends. Agents interviewed him at his home in Florida, just down the street from Mackerly. Anderson had also owned a bus company in New Jersey and had been a commercial pilot after a decade of military service.
So now we had two investigators, Driscoll and myself, and a prosecutor, a land Jay, all being Marines, and then the person who we believe could be the key to solving the case, Bill Anderson, being a Marine. And so I think there was some camaraderie right there from the start.
Investigators felt that bond would help them develop Anderson as a witness. He told the agents his friendship with Mackerly had been strained recently, but he was reluctant to detail Mackerly's relationship with Frank Black. The agents felt Anderson knew something that could break the case wide open.
There was a little hesitancy on his part. We took it easy on him and gave him a little space, gave him the opportunity to do whatever he needed to do, to confer with counsel or whatever. In our minds, we knew that we were talking to the man that had the answers, and he wasn't telling us.
The agents met with Anderson on many occasions and slowly won his confidence. They knew he was loyal to his friend Alan Mackerly, but they felt his sense of honor would eventually cause him to turn. Despite Anderson's lingering doubts, agents believed he was ready to talk by early August. They suspected a subpoena would help him justify turning against his friend.
In my experience, good, honest, hard-working people that flew fighter jets in the Marine Corps would have a difficult time going under oath before the whole world and God and lying about it.
Investigators had to take the chance. Like Costello, if Anderson had any part in the crime, his statements could not be used to prosecute him for murder. Five months after the disappearance of millionaire Frank Black, investigators had little evidence to support their theory that Black was murdered by his business rival, Alan Mackerly. Looking for a fresh lead, investigators subpoenaed Mackerly's close friend, Bill Anderson. Anderson had been reluctant to talk, but after a month, the former Marine's sense of honor prevailed. He began by telling investigators that Alan Mackerly had purchased a plane earlier that year. Mackerly asked Anderson to become his private pilot, since Anderson had experience flying fighter jets and commercial airliners. In exchange, Anderson could use Mackerly's plane as he wished. In March of 1996, while staying at a hotel in Leesburg, Florida, to supervise repairs on the plane, Anderson was contacted by Mackerly. His friend said he needed him to take the plane out over the ocean. Anderson explained that the aircraft would be grounded for several more days. He suggested they rent another plane. Mackerly insisted on using his own plane. He didn't want anybody else to know about the flight. Anderson asked why.
Mackerly told Bill that he had shot Frank Black and that they had wrapped his body up in plastic, that they had taken the body out in the ocean and thrown it out in the ocean, and that the bag did not sink. And he went on to tell Bill that it didn't sink, so he took a knife and stuck some holes in it, and the body did sink.
Mackerly told Anderson he was worried that the body had surfaced. He wanted to fly over the area to make sure it hadn't. Anderson refused.
Anderson was shocked. I mean, I think he was truly shocked. Anderson, again, was in the bus business, as was Mackerly and Black. And Anderson and Black were not friends. Anderson did not like Black in the least either. But still, over a business rivalry, you don't kill somebody.
According to Anderson, Mackerly murdered Black in the foyer of his house. The former Marine pilot confirmed what investigators had suspected all along.
It was the big break in the case. I mean, this was the moment we were all waiting for. And I remember explaining to him right away that, Bill, we're going to have to do a covert recording of you rehashing this conversation with Alan Mackerly.
Without a body or murder weapon, they would need Mackerly's confession on tape. Anderson's testimony was good, but in court it would be his word against Mackerly's. Anderson told prosecutor Robert Belanger that he was reluctant to wear a wire.
He was afraid of Mackerly because he admitted that he had just killed someone, and Mackerly had also told him about an acquaintance up in New Jersey that got convicted of a crime because someone wore a wire, and he told Bill Anderson, if anyone ever wore a wire on me, I'd kill them.
The investigators promised Anderson police protection. He agreed to wear the wire. The plan was to lure Mackerly to Anderson's house.
You'll be okay, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, this is confident. This is well concealed, so you don't have anything to worry about.
FBI techs wired Anderson for sound and hid a video camera in the kitchen. When the equipment was in place, Anderson called Mackerly.
I'll be here.
He told him he'd been served a subpoena and wanted to talk about what he should do. Mackerly said he would be right over. In case something went wrong, Agent Driscoll would remain hidden in the house to protect Anderson. When the team outside saw Mackerly approaching, they would radio Driscoll to hide.
Yeah. Well,
While waiting, investigators spotted telephone repairmen. Mackerly was paranoid about being bugged. If he saw the workers, he might think they were undercover agents.
We knew that if he came to that house and saw these telephone company trucks, that it would have been all over as far as the investigation.
Mackerly would be there any minute. The investigators quickly ordered the repairmen to leave. They then concealed the dig site. The investigators made it back to the car just before Mackerly pulled up. The investigators tried to alert the men in the house, but they received no response. They radioed again. Still nothing. They had no way to know if Driscoll had received their call. He hadn't. The agent had seconds to hide.
Come in.
Anderson led Mackerly to the kitchen and sat down at the table as planned. He showed Mackerly the subpoena. Mackerly was hesitant to talk.
And he wouldn't talk loudly. He was pointing to the walls and saying, no, whispering like this, no, nobody knows. Whispering so that he couldn't be heard in Anderson's house. Not that he suspected Bill Anderson, but because he expected that the police were everywhere.
They were. Detective Liddy and the others listened to Mackerly and Anderson from the car.
They had a discussion about what Bill Anderson was to testify to and whether or not Bill Anderson should lie for Alan Mackerly. Bill Anderson even asked Alan Mackerly that if he did refuse to testify and was put in jail, if Alan Mackerly would come forward and then tell the truth, and Alan Mackerly assured him that he would.
Mackerly didn't want to continue talking in the house. He led Anderson outside.
Told anyone else what you've told me? No.
This whole thing was supposed to take place at Bill Anderson's kitchen table and no place else. And so when you heard Alan Mackerly say, "Let's take a walk," we were concerned that he was walking Bill Anderson out somewhere to eliminate him.
You told anyone else what you told me? No, nobody.
The property was large
lied,
and covered with
you're
dense
good.
foliage.
Will you come?
They could have walked anywhere. But Mackerly unknowingly walked Anderson close to the surveillance team.
My car is parked only a matter of probably 80 or 100 feet from Mackerly and Anderson. And we could hear distinctly on the transmitter their footsteps as they walked through the gravel, and they walked closer to my vehicle with very little coverage concealing my vehicle. The four of us sat there frozen in our car wondering, is this whole thing going to be blown because he's going to see us?
Their
wish you'd never
case
told
and
me.
their cooperating witness were in jeopardy.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
If the investigators were discovered, they might not be able to protect Anderson from Mackerly's rage. Investigators in Florida watched as cooperating witness Bill Anderson met with murder suspect Alan Mackerly. Anderson was wearing a wire trying to get Mackerly to discuss the murder of Frank Black. New Jersey Detective Lee Liddy feared what Mackerly might do if he caught a glimpse of the nearby investigators.
The two of them walked outside, which was very tense for all the investigators involved, because at this point we have no control over what happens, where they go, or what they say. And because they were walking, and because of the pant leg of Bill Anderson rubbing and the movement of the clothes, it was very difficult to pick up conversation. So at that point, we really weren't sure what was happening.
Before Mackerly could spot the surveillance team, Anderson steered him away. Investigators now had incriminating statements on tape, but not a direct confession. They needed more. Mackerly's alleged accomplice, Lisa Costello, remained in jail. She had been charged with contempt of court 3 months earlier for refusing to honor her subpoena. Agents would seek information from her friends to increase the pressure on the hostile witness. They interviewed Costello's former roommate. She said Costello used to deal cocaine and the sedative Rufinol, which is odorless and tasteless. Depending on the dose, Rufinol can relax a person or render them unconscious. FDLE Special Agent Michael Driscoll believed Costello sedated Frank Black with the drug.
We suspected, matter of fact, from day one, that at some point Lisa and Frank Black may have gone to dinner or for drinks, and she was able to do that. Because Frank Black would not willingly or knowingly go into Alan McAlee's house.
Hoping this information might pressure her into talking, a prosecutor met with Lisa Costello in jail. He told her that if she didn't cooperate, she would not have immunity. She could be charged with murder. Costello remained silent, despite the warnings of prosecutor Robert Belanger.
And Lisa Costello could have walked out of that jail cell any day simply by coming out and honoring that subpoena and telling us what she knew about the case. But she was a tough enough witness that she sat in jail on a civil contempt.
Despite Costello's silence, investigators pressed on. Assistant State Attorney Lawrence Merman felt they were ready to arrest.
We had an ear witness to a confession who was a very close friend of the defendant. We had a motive, we had circumstantial evidence. It was a very strong case.
On August 29th, agents began aerial surveillance on Alan McAlee. A ground team assembled around the perimeter of the suspect's house. They made sure he was alone inside. That evening, the arrest team positioned themselves by his door. They would wait until he emerged to take him down in the open.
Hold him right there! Hold him right there!
When he stepped out with his dog, the team struck. The stunned suspect offered no resistance. 7 months after Frank Black vanished, Alan McAlee was arrested for kidnapping and murder. With no physical evidence, prosecutors prepared for a difficult trial. When McAlee's arrest hit the news, they received a call from a man with information on the case. The man agreed to give a statement. Robert Senadazian was Alan McAlee's son-in-law. He said that he'd received a call from McAlee on February 25th, the day after Black arrived in Florida. McAlee asked him to come over to help him clean his house. When Senadazian arrived on Monday, February 26th, he saw that McAlee and Costello had already begun major renovations in the foyer. The carpet had been ripped up, and parts of the wall had been removed.
Okay, I guess the next thing to do is we need to take this man.
Senadazian told prosecutor Robert Belanger that McAlee explained why.
Alan McAlee told Rob Senadazian, Frank Black was at my home last Saturday. And even Senadazian knew the relationship between Alan McAlee and Frank Black and expressed some surprise. Why would Frank Black be at your home? And Alan clearly didn't want to talk about it. He just said, given the O.J. Simpson trial, DNA evidence, we got to make sure there's not even a hair of Frank Black's found in this home.
Senadazian swore that he never saw any blood. Special Agent Miller asked if Senadazian had questioned McAlee about what had happened.
His response was something to the effect that he didn't have to ask his father-in-law, that he knew something really bad had occurred there in the house, and that they were in fact cleaning up a mess.
They used an industrial vacuum cleaner to clean the entire area. Then McAlee asked Senadazian to help him haul the debris to the local dump. Senadazian told investigators that he and McAlee discarded sheetrock carpeting and even the vacuum cleaner in the Martin County landfill. His statement corroborated Bill Anderson's story.
Anderson told us that McAlee had told him that he had killed Frank Black in the entry to his house. And now we had Senadazian telling us that immediately after Frank Black's disappearance, he was summoned to that house to do a remodeling job or a makeover of the foyer area right where Anderson states Mackerly said he shot Frank Black.
In the middle of August, an evidence recovery team arrived at the landfill. Based on records, investigators were able to determine where the items were likely dumped 6 months earlier on February 26th. The recovery team searched for anything that could be traced back to Mackerly's home. For 3 hot days, investigators scoured a specific area of the landfill.
The landfill management was able to determine by the date exactly where it was. And it was in a spot that was actually feasible and possible that we'd find it. So we did that. We got the equipment with the sheriff's office, crime scene and so forth, and we dug it up and we found carpeting that we believed was from Mackerly's residence.
Investigators found portions of sheetrock and a vacuum cleaner that matched the description Sanadagian had given. They brought the items to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Forensics Laboratory for analysis. Despite their strong suspicions, lab analysts were unable to conclusively match any of the items to Mackerly's house. Technicians also processed Mackerly's foyer and retrieved traces of what appeared to be blood. Unfortunately, DNA markers found in the samples could not be exclusively matched to Frank Black's DNA. It was another dead end. Investigators still had no physical evidence. Agents pressed on, continuing to build a strong circumstantial case for State Prosecutor Belanger by further corroborating Sanadagian's story about the cleanup.
The FBI went to Walmarts and Kmarts and got receipts where Alan Mackerly was buying bleach and Comet and cleaning supplies and trash bags and duct tape and all the tools and implements he needed to clean up a crime scene.
Just before trial, investigators received disturbing news. Martin County Jail inmates claimed that Mackerly had hired someone to kill Bill Anderson. Mackerly knew that if he could prevent Anderson from testifying, prosecutors would have to drop their case. Early in 1997, murder suspect Alan Mackerly was held without bond for the murder of Frank Black. While he was behind bars, investigators learned he had ordered the murder of witness Bill Anderson.
As of that point, the security for Bill Anderson tremendously increased, and we began making arrangements to have Bill and his wife go into the Federal Witness Protection Program.
Mackerly's would-be hitman would not be a reliable witness in court, so attempted murder-for-hire charges against Mackerly were dropped. Alan Mackerly's trial began on January 20th, 1998. Even without the victim's body, Florida State Prosecutor Robert Belanger was confident in the case.
There's case law going back to Old England where murderers have been prosecuted without a body successfully, and the courts have said that we don't reward people because they successfully disposed of the body. You can still prove death through circumstantial evidence like any other fact in a case, by person's habits and routines, by the fact that they didn't pack for a long trip, by declarations of intent, I'm going to go to Florida. All these things combined demonstrated pretty conclusively that Frank Black was dead. Nevertheless, that is a source of frustration.
Mr. Mackerly told me
the prosecution's main witness, Bill Anderson, recalled what he knew about Frank Black's murder. Prosecutors filled in the gaps and detailed the events of February 24th, 1996, the last day Black was seen alive. Mackerly's lover, Lisa Costello, picked up Frank Black at the West Palm Beach airport that evening. She took him to Mackerly's house on the pretense of meeting other business partners. Black was unaware that he had just stepped into the home of his bitter rival.
So how long have you been in the busing business?
While Costello and Black discussed the lucrative business deal, prosecutors believe Costello dropped a capsule of Rufinol into his drink.
If you'd like, I'd be happy to.
Black would not have noticed. The powerful sedative is odorless, colorless, and tasteless.
I must be just tired.
The two talked while Costello waited for the drug to take effect. As planned, Mackerly took over at that point.
It worked.
Get his wallet.
He had Costello remove Black's wallet.
Hey, why don't you go get change?
Later, they would use his credit cards to create a false trail for police. Black was powerless due to the heavy sedative.
Get out.
Finally in control of his rival, Mackerly's hatred boiled over. In the foyer, he put a gun to Black's head.
Alan? Alan!
Mackerly had to get rid of the evidence. He wrapped the body and murder weapon in plastic. Using one of his power boats, he would later dump the body about 16 miles offshore.
Took the body out about 20 miles.
Anderson testified that Mackerly said he had to stab through the plastic in Black's body several times to get it to sink. He then returned home to finish cleaning up. He tore out anything that had been stained by blood or human tissue. Using bleach, they scrubbed the entire area clean. Anderson's testimony was bolstered by powerful circumstantial evidence. Phone calls linking Mackerly and Black, Robert Sanadagian's story of the cleanup, and covert recordings from Anderson's house.
Thunder will rise. How do you find the defendant?
It was enough to convince the jury.
Guilty as charged.
On February 4th, 1998, they found Alan Mackerly guilty of kidnapping and murder. After Mackerly's trial, prosecutors turned to Lisa Costello.
When I looked, I saw the dead body.
Faced with murder charges, she finally gave a full statement as to the events that led to Frank Black's death.
Ultimately, she entered a plea to third-degree murder and false imprisonment, which are lesser included offenses. She was sentenced to 10 years in the Florida State Prison.
An appeals court overturned Mackerly's kidnapping conviction, finding that Frank Black traveled to Florida on his own volition. But the murder conviction stood. Alan Mackerly was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Although Frank Black's body has not yet been recovered, his killer, Alan Mackerly, will never go free. At the height of its popularity, Chippendale's exotic male dance troupe played to sell-out crowds. People across the country shelled out millions to see them. Then one of the founding partners was murdered, and New York City police were left with no leads. When a suspect finally did emerge, the chase would take the FBI to another continent in the hopes of solving the Backstage Murder.
the 1980s, two partners created a nightclub that would bring them wealth and international fame. The male strip club phenomenon promised female patrons fun and excitement, but the bright lights hid a dark side. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI would launch a sting operation spanning 2 continents to bring down a man who killed for profit.
New York City is famous for its show business tradition. Within a 4-block radius of Times Square, hundreds of offices are rented by producers looking for their next hit. One such place was on the 15th floor of a building on West 40th Street. In 1987, it was home to Unicorn Productions. Nick DeNoia was its founder and president. Curiously, the 5-time Emmy Award-winning children's television producer became best known as the producer and vice president of Chippendales, the exotic male dancers. On April 7th, 1987, he was gunned down.
Nick.
A colleague heard the shot. He found DeNoia dead on the floor and called 911.
May I help you?
Oh, yes. A man has just been shot in my office.
Hold on, please. I have to connect you with the ambulance service.
Oh, please.
Certainly.
Emergency vehicles arrived moments later. NYPD crime technicians gathered evidence. They recovered a shell casing from a 9mm automatic weapon. DeNoia's colleague told homicide detective Michael Geddes that a strange man had entered the office just prior to the shooting.
He said maybe about a half hour ago, or 45 minutes ago, somebody came into the office and said to him, "Are you Nick?" And he said, "No, Nick is in the other office, and he's busy right now."
Without looking up from his work, the associate pointed the man to DeNoia's office. He never saw the stranger's face. The witness told detectives that moments later, he noticed the same man in the bathroom.
While he was in the bathroom, he heard this guy leaving the bathroom, and a couple of seconds later, he heard the door to his office open up. And then he heard a gunshot.
The last sound the witness heard was the exit door to the stairwell swing open, then close. Detective Geddes traced the killer's path, hoping to find something along the way that would point to his identity.
I took down the route that I thought that the shooter might have taken to see if there was any evidence or anything. And I ran down the 15 floors, I believe it was. And when I got down to the end, there was 2 exits. One would lead to the lobby area, one would lead to the freight elevator area. So I exited out of the freight elevator area, then came back in and exited out of the lobby area just to get a feel for the scene.
On the ground floor, detectives investigated the freight area. They dusted for prints, but were unable to lift any that were usable. The freight elevator operator had seen a man run through the door and out to the street. He recalled that the suspect wore jeans and had dark hair.
He also gave us the exit of how the fella came out of the building as he exited the building on 40th Street, and when he came out, he made a left towards 8th Avenue.
Upstairs, 2 city detectives arrived with Nick DeNoia's brother Val from New Jersey to identify the body. The men had been close. Val was devastated by the sight of his murdered brother. Afterwards, Val DeNoia came to the precinct to help investigators in any way he could. Nick's brother wanted the case solved as soon as possible. Detective Geddes hoped Val knew something that could provide a solid lead.
Being a detective, one of the hardest things to do is to tell somebody, you know, that, hey, we're not going to be able to solve this case right away unless you know something that can help us. And I explained to him at that time, I said, look, if it was something that happened here in the New York area, maybe it was a business relationship here or a relationship, a love relationship, or some kind of emotional type of relationship, we have a good shot of solving that crime right away.
For Val DeNoia, one name came to mind, his brother's business partner, Steve Banerjee. Banerjee had known Nick DeNoia since the early 80s. Val told the detective that his brother met him in Los Angeles. Nick DeNoia had traveled to LA hoping to build upon the success he enjoyed in New York. The 5-time Emmy Award-winning producer fielded many offers, but one man in particular was relentless in his pursuit. Steve Banerjee, the East Indian immigrant and entrepreneur who had dreamt up Chippendale's male exotic dance revue, wanted DeNoia to fashion a more refined act. Though ladies-only nights in LA were extremely popular, Banerjee wanted a dance troupe worthy enough to draw audiences in New York and Las Vegas. He believed that Nick DeNoia was the man who could make that dream come true. Val DeNoia said that his brother was reluctant at first, feeling the act was too sleazy. When Banerjee promised him all touring rights and 50% of its proceeds, DeNoia accepted the offer. Nick polished the routine and booked the troupe at Club Magique in New York. The newly styled Chippendales dancers became an instant hit. But shortly after his success, Val told the detective that Nick's relationship with Banerjee had soured. Banerjee demanded a larger percentage of the touring profits, but Nick refused to give in.
They were always constantly arguing, and they were arguing about different ends of the business, and, you know, it's just like regular business partners, you know, but they were having trouble. And DeNoia was starting to take his troupe out, and he was going to form a new business.
He was doing very well.
In the weeks prior to his death, Nick was negotiating touring deals for a troupe he designed to compete directly with Chippendales. Stealing market share from Chippendales could cost Banerjee millions. Val offered the detectives his brother's financial records. NYPD set up surveillance at Nick DeNoia's funeral since detectives suspected he'd been murdered by someone he knew. Nick's brother would help identify as many mourners as possible. Nick's partner, Steve Banerjee, was among those who paid their respects. The following day, investigators phoned Banerjee in California to inquire about his relationship with his late partner. For Detective Geddes, the interview had a subtler agenda than fact-finding.
We were trying to get what we call a negative interview, you know, where if he says, no, I had nothing to do with it, we were great friends, and things like that, just to try to disprove things that were starting to be said, so if later on it was involved with him, we could just tie it all together.
You know, it's, like I said to you, it's
Banerjee never contradicted what police already knew.
You know,
he acknowledged that he and DeNoia did not get along, and admitted that he was upset that his partner had formed a new dance troupe.
Someone who could verify that for you.
Any help that I can do, officer.
Banerjee added that on April 7th, the day of the murder, he had been in Los Angeles the entire day.
Yeah, you know.
That did not rule out the possibility that a hitman had been hired.
Thank you very much.
But detectives had nothing to prove it. The DeNoia family offered a substantial reward for anyone who came forward with information. Police received several calls, but none panned out.
We always felt this fellow, Steve Banerjee, had something to do with it, but nobody could really give us any concrete evidence or even steer us in the direction of where we could tie anybody into what happened.
Lacking any other leads, the freight elevator
Dark hair.
operator from Denoya's building provided his description of the man he saw run from the stairwell. Though he had seen him only briefly, police hoped it would be enough to prompt someone else's memory.
Pretty much.
Police canvassed the lobby of Denoya's office building well into the evening. They asked everyone who worked there if they recognized the sketch. None did. The killer had apparently vanished in the middle of a workday amongst millions of New York City commuters.
Well, basically, the investigation just, it kind of hit a brick wall. And we really weren't going anywhere with it. We had a sketch that was out there. There was a reward that was out there. There was we even put it on television, trying to get some assistance, figuring if the person that did this was from another state, that somebody would give us the information. But we constantly hit that brick wall, and it wasn't going anywhere.
No new leads surfaced. To New York City police, it looked as if the killer had gotten away with murder.
Dick.
4 years had passed since Chippendale's choreographer Nick Denoya had been murdered in his Manhattan office. The case remained unsolved. Then, in July 1991, over 2,500 miles away, Special Agent Dan West at the FBI's Las Vegas field office received a call. It was from a man who claimed he had been hired to kill 2 people for $25,000.
I immediately wasn't sure whether or not he was just a prank call. It's not unusual for the FBI, especially in Las Vegas on a weekend, to receive prank calls, a lot of alcohol flowing. So I asked him to give me specific details of the alleged planned murder.
The caller said that a man named Ray Cologne had hired him to kill 2 managers of a male exotic dance troupe touring England. They were competitors of the Chippendales dancers. The source said he did not know why Cologne wanted the men dead, but for some reason the would-be hitman had decided not to go through with it.
I'm not sure if the source backed out because of Good Samaritan reasons or because he chickened out. He flew to England and then flew back to the United States almost immediately. I think he flew into Los Angeles and then drove to Las Vegas, basically to hide out.
The agent told the source to meet him at the office at 5 o'clock the next morning. He needed to somehow confirm the caller's story.
He also said that he had worked with the DEA in prior investigations as an informant, and he provided me with the name of a DEA agent in Houston who could vouch for him.
The DEA agent confirmed that he had previously worked with the source and insisted that the man was to be trusted. After the FBI arranged protection for the intended victims in England, the informant described the murder plan. Preparations were made a few days earlier at the Los Angeles home of his former landlord, Ray Cologne, the man who had hired him. Cologne led the would-be hitman to his garage, where they met Cologne's brother-in-law, who had recently returned from scouting the victims in England.
Look, man, we want this.
He told the informant that he could find his targets in the town of Blackpool on July 20th, when the exotic dancers were scheduled to perform there. Because of England's strict gun laws, smuggling a gun in was out of the question. Instead, Cologne instructed the hitman to kill his victims by fatal injection. He mixed a dose of cyanide powder into a small vial. They figured it could be smuggled past customs in a bottle of eye drops. The agent needed something more solid than the statement of one informant to bring in Ray Cologne. He consented to get Cologne on tape. The reformed hitman would call Cologne and pretend that he was still in England.
What we were trying to get from the telephone conversations was strong evidence that Cologne was a part of the plan to kill the two intended victims, if not the organizer of the plan. We had the information from the source, but we had to verify that through the tape conversations.
Hello? Ray!
Yeah.
Barry, buddy! Are you sure that damn stuff is gonna work? It's pretty red, buddy.
Yeah, it'll work.
Oh, man, I don't want to...
But and if you want to add something to it...
How long is it gonna take before they croak and hit down? Is that an immediate, if not sooner?
Yeah, right. That's probably potent. You can even put a little, if you want, a little Drano in there if you want.
Well, it's gonna kill them right away then, huh? Okay.
It was evident from the beginning that Ray Cologne was not only a participant in this murder-for-hire scheme, but that he was actually the director of it. Cologne provided numerous suggestions to the source on how to best effect the death of these two intended victims.
What wasn't evident from the recordings was a motive for killing two managers of an exotic male dance troupe.
Do you know who hired Cologne?
During the conversations, Cologne had made reference to a third man who was providing money for the double murder. But the informant told Agent West that he did not know the man's name. 2 days later, on Wednesday, July 25th, 1991, a federal judge in California was convinced that the FBI had enough probable cause to search Cologne's Los Angeles home.
What's up?
Cologne was surprised by the warrant. It limited the agent's search to cyanide, travel records to England, and correspondence that could link Cologne and his brother-in-law to the intended murder. In the bedroom, they found flyers for the male exotic dance tour in England.
Harry, let me have a bag, will you?
They also found 2 handguns in a drawer. Records indicated they had been legally purchased by Ray Cologne. And since the warrant didn't specify weapons, the guns were not seized. In the garage, agents did find something the warrant had specified. A bag filled with cyanide. It corroborated their informant's story.
This is what he was talking about.
Then, one agent found something that would break the case wide open.
During the course of the search warrant, we found Cologne's address book. Special Agent Andy Stefanik from the Los Angeles office was going through that book, and he noticed the name of Steve Banerjee.
Agent West also discovered that Steve Banerjee, the well-known Los Angeles owner of Chippendale's nightclub, had called Cologne recently.
The toll record showed several conversations, several calls going back and forth between Banerjee and Cologne. In addition, that same day, we received the results of interviews from the British police on the intended victims, and both indicated that Steve Banerjee was the only person they could possibly think of who would have a motive to kill them or would even want to kill them.
The 2 managers of the rival male dance troupe believed that Banerjee wanted them dead to stop them from competing with Chippendales. This was the same motive that New York authorities suspected was behind the murder of Banerjee's former business partner, Nick DeNoia. Agents called New York City homicide detective Michael Geddes to find out more about the 5-year-old DeNoia murder.
All of a sudden, I got a phone call from the FBI. I really got excited at that point because it was already maybe 5 years, 5.5 years or so. So it looked like we might have the opportunity to give the family their final piece.
But neither the NYPD nor the FBI had direct evidence against Steve Banerjee.
Yeah, you already in Amsterdam?
And agents were still unsure if Cologne would be able to assist the murder investigation.
We at that time did not know whether or not Cologne was involved in the Nick DeNoia murder. The composite picture resembled Cologne, but it certainly wasn't a match.
Despite their uncertainty about Cologne's role in Denoya's murder, they had strong evidence against him for conspiracy to commit murder. Faced with stiff jail time, the FBI believed he would talk.
Cologne knew that he had to take a hit. There was no question about that. He was caught red-handed in the planning of the murder of two individuals. So he had to accept the fact that he was going to go down for some time himself, but that it was going to be a lot less time in jail if he worked with us.
On August 2nd, 1991, agents arrested Cologne and his brother-in-law for conspiracy to commit murder. Cologne's arrest would increase the pressure to tell the FBI what he knew about Steve Banerjee and the murder of Banerjee's partner, Nick Denoya. What the FBI didn't count on was that Cologne's arrest would make Chippendale's owner Steve Banerjee far more elusive. In August 1991, the FBI arrested Ray Cologne and his brother-in-law in Los Angeles for conspiracy to commit murder. Their two targets, who escaped unharmed, were managers of a male exotic dance troupe touring England. Agents believed that a third man, Steve Banerjee, creator of Chippendales, had hired them to kill the men.
Watch your head.
Special Agent Dan West needed more than a hunch to arrest Banerjee. He hoped that Ray Cologne would provide something more solid.
He knew that that his best chances of getting the best deal were to cooperate with the FBI. He had indicated to us that we only had a small fraction of the story. He took a sheet of paper, he said, right now you have this, and I can give you the whole page.
As agents had suspected, Cologne admitted that Steve Banerjee was the man who had hired him to carry out the murders. He also told agents that the wealthy Chippendales club owner had ordered the murder of his partner, Nick Denoya, in New York 5 years before. For consideration of a lighter sentence, Cologne signed a proffer agreeing to help the FBI gather enough evidence to arrest Banerjee. Special Agent Scott Garriola from the FBI's Los Angeles field office learned that Cologne's association with Banerjee had begun by chance over a decade earlier.
Cologne had lived and managed an apartment building on the same street where Chippendale's Los Angeles club was. And by being so close in proximity, he would frequent the bar and over the course of time became close friends with Banerjee.
Cologne explained that his friend Steve Banerjee had immigrated to the U.S. from India in the early 70s. In 1973, the future millionaire opened a gas station north of the Los Angeles airport. He used the profits to purchase a failing West Los Angeles bar, and by 1976 had turned it into the nightclub that became famous as Chippendales. By then, Cologne had parlayed his friendship with Banerjee into employment. The out-of-work musician was happy to perform any job that Banerjee needed done.
Right off the street.
One service Cologne provided was arson. Banerjee wanted his competitors eliminated. Cologne confided that Banerjee directed him to burn down nearby competition. A disco in Santa Monica was the first target in 1979. 5 years later, Cologne torched another club. Neither arson attempt had been successful and the clubs remained open. Banerjee didn't limit his targets to buildings. According to Cologne, Banerjee also ordered him to hire a hitman to kill his partner, Nick Denoya. Cologne added that Denoya had successfully sued Banerjee to prevent him from touring a second Chippendales dance troupe. The lawsuit, combined with costly merchandising overruns, forced Banerjee to file for bankruptcy. As instructed, Colon hired a hitman 3 months earlier.
Right off the street.
He claimed he remembered only the man's first name, which was Louis. On the day of the murder, Colon and Louis flew in from LA, rented a car, and drove into Manhattan. Colon waited on the street with the engine running until Louis returned from shooting Denoya. The following night, Colon was back in Los Angeles. In Chippendale's parking lot, Banerjee paid Colon $12,000 cash, the balance of the original $25,000 fee. Colon's story was good, but it was only hearsay from a suspected conspirator. He might say anything to serve less jail time. Special Agent Garriola first needed to verify the facts Colon had presented.
At this point, all we had was somebody in prison telling us, well, it wasn't me, it was somebody else who was behind it. Your initial plan is to corroborate as much as possible what he's telling you. And that's what we did for the first couple of months.
With Colon's credibility secured, the FBI set out to get Banerjee and the hitman who killed his partner. Agents figured the only one Banerjee would trust enough to confess to would be his old friend Ray Colon, but they needed to get Colon close enough.
We had Colon released out of the jail where he was being housed under a proposed medical furlough because of his health problems. And we started sending communications to Banerjee via letter, messenger-delivered letters, and cryptic phone calls to try and get Banerjee to respond to him.
Banerjee refused to return calls or letters. He was suspicious of Colon, despite having paid him over $200,000 in various drops around the city to keep Colon loyal since his arrest. The FBI came up with another plan to compel Banerjee to respond to Colon.
We decided to force the issue and set up a meeting on our own terms. And we had Colon waiting across the street from Chippendale's one morning.
As agents watched, Colon called to Banerjee when he emerged from the club. The Chippendale's owner was curious as to why Colon was standing outside his establishment. Banerjee spoke to him in whispers, suspecting he may be wired. Agents had no way of knowing what Banerjee might be planning.
We took several precautions. If he hired somebody else, Colon, to kill somebody, why wouldn't he hire somebody to kill Colon?
Hoping to strengthen Banerjee's trust, the released prisoner provided the address of a bar where the suspected murderer was to send more money. Banerjee didn't trust Colon, but he couldn't afford to ignore him. He told Colon to pick up his payment the next evening. Agents set up surveillance on the bar. At about 9 o'clock, agents observed Banerjee stopping in front, checking the address, and then driving away. A short time later, a messenger delivered a package. Agents retrieved it from inside.
When we contacted the messenger company that had sent the package, the pickup location where the package was received from was a bakery that was right next door to the building where the Chippendales dancers were practicing and rehearsing.
Back in the FBI offices, agents opened the package, not knowing what might be inside. It contained $14,000.
I guess we got them both.
The payoff meant that Banerjee would continue to keep Ray Colon close to him. But agents didn't know if Banerjee would talk, or if the hitman, known only as Louis, would ever be found. In the summer of 1992, FBI agents continued to surveil Chippendale's club owner, Steve Banerjee. He was suspected of ordering the murder of his partner more than 5 years earlier. Ray Colon, hired by Banerjee to arrange the murder, had been arrested and was cooperating with agents to capture the wealthy club owner. Wearing a wire, Colon met the East Indian entrepreneur at a hotel in Santa Monica, hoping to get his confession on tape. Special Agent Scott Garriola and his team were stationed nearby.
Banerjee immediately motioned for Colon to join him in the men's room. When the two of them went into the men's room, and Banerjee told him to be quiet, not to say a word, he searched Colon about 3 times looking for the wire.
Agents worried about what the suspected murderer might do to Colon if he found the wire. Colon's life depended on the FBI's skills at concealment.
All right? Okay.
Banerjee never found the wire, but it was clear that he did not completely trust his longtime friend Ray Colon. Out in the lobby, Banerjee insisted they communicate through notes instead of speaking. Agents recorded only scribbles and whispers. Banerjee wanted to know how much Colon had told the FBI and what they knew about, quote, the deed. Colon knew the deed referred to the murder of Banerjee's partner. The former musician denied that he had said anything to federal agents.
Once again, we were unsuccessful in getting an audible recording due to the fact that Banerjee basically whispered throughout the whole thing and wrote notes. And when Colon would raise his voice and try and talk, Banerjee would shush him basically by putting his finger to his mouth and saying, "No, we can't talk."
Banerjee gathered the notes and returned to the restroom, this time alone. Despite his doubts about Colon's loyalty, Banerjee handed him another payment, this time in plain view of agents. The package held $30,000, more than twice as much as the first. Unfortunately for investigators, there was nothing illegal about giving Colon cash.
On its face, it's basically a loan for attorney's fees for Colon. Without the story on tape of how Colon and Banerjee were partners in these crimes, the money basically was not going to be able to do anything for the case.
After Banerjee's Mercedes was out of sight, agents hoped to retrieve at least a portion of the notes from the meeting. In the men's room under a toilet, one agent discovered a scrap of paper. It seemed that Banerjee had flushed the rest. Though it held only a small pen mark, it would help corroborate Colon's story when it came time to testify at trial. Colon did not remember the full name of the hitman he had hired in 1987, but he did recall that his first name was Louis, and he lived somewhere in East Los Angeles.
Colon didn't have a last name for him, didn't have an address. We took him out a couple of times, had him drive us around the area, and he pointed out a house that he thought Louis had lived in.
Colon's memory proved correct. The woman who answered the door was Louis's mother. Since she did not know Colon, she refused to tell him where her son was. Colon told her that he wanted to provide work for him and handed her his card. In a few days, Colon received a call.
Unfortunately, what we came across was Louis's brother, Andy, and we had to establish a relationship with Andy to try and find out where Louis was. So we had Colon talking to Andy about various things. He needed to hire Louis back for a job, same job he had completed a few years prior.
After about a month, Andy finally told Colon that he could find his brother, Roberto Rivera Lopez, in Los Angeles' county prison. Rivera, whose nickname was Louis, was serving time for possession of narcotics and would be out of jail in a few months. As a heroin junkie, He would need fast cash after his release and wanted to know more about Colon's offer.
Colon laid the groundwork once again for this new job that he wanted Rivera to help him with. And the plan that we had set in motion was that there was a witness to the homicide in 1987, and that Louis needed to go back and take care of that witness.
Near the end of 1992, Colon met with the hitman for the first time in 5 years. With their conversation being monitored, the FBI informant slowly drew Louis Rivera in, detailing a new murder plot. If the FBI ever hoped to get the hitman confessing on tape, it had to be now.
His release date on the charge he was incarcerated for was, I believe, January 17th of '93. We were running up against the clock. And one of our concerns was that, we had laid the groundwork for Colon and Rivera, that when Rivera got out, he was supposed to contact Colon to go and kill this witness.
Agents' worries were laid to rest. On Christmas Eve 1992, Rivera described his role in the murder of Nick DeNoia. At 3:30 p.m. on April 7th, 1987, Louis arrived on the 15th floor of DeNoia's building disguised as a messenger. The place was empty except for one man in the outer office. Moments later, when the office worker entered the men's room, Louis exited to kill DeNoia, figuring there'd be no other witnesses to the crime. He found the producer at his desk, pulled out a 9mm semi-automatic, and fired from 3 feet away. The FBI had it all on tape. Ray Colon had fulfilled half of his agreement with the FBI to receive sentencing consideration on his charge of conspiracy to commit murder. The other half hinged on his ability to secure a taped confession from the man who had ordered DeNoia's murder, his longtime friend, Steve Banerjee. So far, more than a year after his arrest, Colon had been unable to do that. By January 1993, the FBI's cooperating witness Ray Colon had been unable to convince murder suspect Steve Banerjee to discuss aloud the crimes they had planned together. They had met several times, but Banerjee had been too paranoid or too clever to be recorded. At one meeting, Banerjee suggested he'd help Colon hide out overseas. Special Agent Scott Garriola and his team used Banerjee's suggestion to form a new plan. Perhaps Banerjee could be lured overseas to talk to Colon on foreign soil.
I don't think it was too difficult on Banerjee's part to accept the fact that Colon was going to go overseas. I mean, he wanted to be rid of Colon. He knew Colon was the only person that could tie him into these various crimes dating back to 1979.
Since Colon was still on Banerjee's payroll, agents believed it was likely that he would visit Colon in person to be certain that Colon had what he needed for an extended stay. Banerjee wanted Colon out of his life permanently. The FBI selected Rome as their destination, since Italy's laws and police force are well adapted to surveillance investigations. Agents made extensive preparations before they arrived.
We acquired a phony United States passport for Colon in an alias name, which you would expect someone who's on the run, a fugitive in another country, to have some kind of phony documentation. So we acquired that. We also entered Colon into the nationwide crime computer as a fugitive. So in the event Banerjee had some kind of private investigator or someone check the computer, it would show that there was a warrant out for Colon's arrest because he was now a fugitive.
With the cooperation of the Italian authorities, the FBI secured an apartment for Cologne in Rome that was wired for recording. When everyone was assembled, Cologne placed a call to Banerjee in California. The East Indian murder suspect understood that Cologne would use the code name Mr. Underwood when he called.
Yeah. Hey, this is Mr. Underwood. How you doing, Steve? So when can you come and discuss the particulars? I cannot go to Italy, but I can go to Switzerland. How about Zurich? Can you come to Zurich? No, that's impossible. Why can't you go to Italy? I know this. Huh? It takes a month to get it.
There was a problem with Banerjee coming to Rome since he was not a United States citizen. He claimed he was not able to obtain a visa in time to enter Italy, and he wanted initially to meet us up by the Italian-Swiss border.
Banerjee finally agreed to meet Cologne in Zurich, Switzerland. The FBI had only a short time to make the new arrangements.
It was quite a challenge to get everything accomplished. Basically, this was a Friday, I believe, and it was basically one day since no one worked on a weekend back in the States. We had to get everything, all the necessary approvals for the travel, the country clearance. We had to get the U.S. Attorney's Office to contact, through a mutual legal assistance treaty, contact their counterparts in Switzerland to get the authority, the legal authority to do the consensual recordings. It was quite arduous, to say the least.
We will take
Despite the brief turnaround time, the FBI and Swiss authorities would be ready.
across towards the main door.
The plan was to wire Cologne for a meeting in the hotel lobby. Afterwards, the informant would suggest continuing the meeting in his hotel room, which would be equipped with audio and video devices planted by a special unit of the Swiss police.
The bar.
Two adjoining rooms were booked in a downtown Zurich hotel. One room they wired for picture and sound. The room next door would hold the monitoring equipment. Agents hoped that this time, their efforts would finally be rewarded with Banerjee's confession on tape. From the time of his arrival at the Zurich airport, Steve Banerjee would be under constant police surveillance. The plan was for Cologne to call Banerjee and arrange a meeting in another hotel late in the afternoon. As planned, Banerjee arrived first. Undercover agents and Swiss police were stationed throughout the hotel dressed as staff. He waited in the bar where he was expecting Cologne's call. On cue, the phone rang. Cologne was on his way. This was the FBI's best chance to get the recording they had long awaited. To be sure Banerjee's voice was taped clearly, they hid the wire inside Cologne's outermost layer of clothing, his coat. But Cologne seemed nervous and removed his coat when he arrived. As a result, investigators could no longer hear the conversation. Years of pursuit hung in the balance. It seemed unlikely that Banerjee would agree to meet Cologne again anytime soon.
We had ourselves a major problem. So what I initially did was, since I was monitoring the conversation from the outside, I went into the doorway of the restaurant, and hopefully in Cologne's line of eyesight, and I took my jacket off a couple of times, hoping he would get the idea to put his jacket on.
Nobody's going to come back in. Okay. The receptionist.
But the agent couldn't get Cologne's attention.
Testimony isn't going anywhere.
The informant was apparently too nervous to look anywhere except directly at Banerjee.
The Swiss police, they came to our rescue. They went in there and they closed the whole restaurant down. They went in and talked to the owner, the manager of the restaurant, said, hey, we got a little problem. We need to shut this restaurant down. Fortunately, there weren't too many customers in there, and basically they closed the restaurant down, which forced Colon and Banerjee to leave the restaurant.
After moving to a noisier bar in the hotel, Colon suggested they'd be more comfortable relaxing in the room where Colon was staying. Colon arrived first. He was met by a Swiss technician who attempted to strip the wire from his jacket before Banerjee arrived. Colon's device was an unnecessary risk since the room itself was wired.
We didn't know what Banerjee was going to do once the two of them were in the hotel. They had gone from a public place to strictly a private place, and we were a little concerned at this point for what Banerjee may have up his sleeve.
Undercover agents alerted the surveillance team that Banerjee had arrived on Colon's floor. The Swiss tech retrieved the wire and stepped into the adjoining room. Colon barely had time to pour himself a drink before there was a knock on the door. The first thing Banerjee did was check Colon for wires. He found none and began to relax. Colon poured him a drink. Then his old friend opened up.
In broad daylight, downtown Manhattan.
Banerjee felt comfortable enough to talk about murdering his partner. He mentioned the $25,000 he paid to commission the deed. He also made comments about the men in England that he ordered killed. He even talked to Colon about the arsons he had paid for back in 1979. After 5.5 years and 6,000 miles from the crime scene, the FBI's perseverance had finally paid off. At last, they had it all on tape, and Colon earned himself an early parole.
That was the coup de grace right there. That was it. We got exactly what we needed. We pretty much corroborated Colon, down to every I, dotted I, and every T that Colon had told us.
On September 2nd, 1993, outside his Chippendales Club in Los Angeles, Steve Banerjee was arrested for racketeering and first-degree murder. Facing life in prison, Banerjee's defense team offered the state's attorneys terms for an agreement. Banerjee would plead guilty to the charges and forfeit his interest in Chippendales for consideration in sentencing. New York State accepted, suggesting 26 years in a maximum security facility. But to Banerjee, the punishment was too severe. On the day of his sentencing in October 1994, he was found hanged in his cell. Michael Geddes, the New York City detective who investigated Nick DeNoya's murder 6 years earlier, was glad to see the case closed.
Ever since Steve Banerjee was arrested and Colon confessed, what happened is I saw that Val DeNoya, the brother, and his wife actually change. You could see the peace in their face. You could see the smile coming back into their life.
Steve Banerjee had immigrated to the United States to fulfill his dreams of success. Blinded by his pursuit, he confused power and the accumulation of wealth with the American dream. In the summer of 1988, a wealthy Jackson, Mississippi woman disappeared from her home in broad daylight. The only clue left behind was a mysterious ransom note. The FBI and local police struggled to find answers in its cryptic message so they could find the kidnapper and retrieve the victim before her time ran out.
A daring kidnapping and a bizarre ransom note baffled Mississippi authorities. The victim was the wife of a wealthy businessman. A list of 12 names and a few drops of blood were the only clues to her fate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The ransom note gave the FBI its first leads, but the case was not so clear-cut. Solving it required the keen insight of a criminal profiler and the perseverance of a family, local authorities, and the FBI.
"6 a.m., July 26, 1988. The heat of a midsummer day would soon bear down on the southern city of Jackson, Mississippi. Like every weekday for the past 48 years, Annie Laurie Hearin had coffee with her husband Robert before he left for work. As early investors in oil, the Heirins had become one of Mississippi's wealthiest couples, with a fortune estimated at more than $100 million. That day, Annie Laurie Hearin would host her bridge club at home, the same house where she raised 2 children and lived with her husband since they were newlyweds. By 3:30, Mrs. Herin's bridge game was over and her friends had left. The housekeeper finished cleaning up after the card game and checked if Mrs. Herin needed anything else. The 73-year-old woman said everything was fine. Annie Hearin planned to spend the rest of her afternoon reading until her husband returned. She wasn't expecting anyone, but perhaps one of the bridge players or the housekeeper had forgotten something. Her husband wasn't due home for an hour.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. I got to see your husband. I have a letter.
I'm back to see him.
No, I don't mind waiting at all. Let me...
Annie Laurie Herin was on her own. At about 4:30 that afternoon, Robert Herin returned from work.
Annie, I'm home.
He saw that his wife wasn't home and figured she was out with her friends or daughter. When she hadn't returned by 5:30, he thought it was strange that his wife of 48 years hadn't called or left a note.
Annie.
The house seemed to be empty.
Annie.
Robert grew concerned and began calling family and friends.
Anywhere that I can tell?
No one had seen Annie since the bridge game.
Maybe we're going to have to do something else. Thank you.
Robert's son-in-law, who lived nearby, said he would be right over. The son-in-law said he and his wife hadn't heard from Mrs. Herin that day.
Oh, right here.
Robert Herin pointed out that when Annie left the house, she usually took her purse.
I've looked everywhere.
But his wife's purse and shoes sat beside her reading chair. Her newspaper and glasses were nearby.
Neighbors, you know, are just, I just don't know what to say.
Robert was worried since Mrs. Herin's medicine for a chronic intestinal disease was still in the bathroom. She would need to take it soon or she would not be able to absorb food. The men continued to search for some indication of where she'd gone. A piece of paper near the front door caught the son-in-law's eye. It was a ransom note, without specific instructions. Annie Laurie Herin had been kidnapped.
We've got to do something real fast.
The note demanded that Robert Herin pay 12 separate men before 10 days passed, but it didn't say how much or where to send the money. He was ordered not to call police, so he waited for a ransom call with instructions on getting his wife back. When none came by nightfall, he contacted the Jackson Police Department despite being warned not to. Officers secured the ransom note, hoping to keep any fingerprints intact. Processing the house for evidence, officers discovered a trace of what appeared to be blood on the front door frame. Laboratory tests would later reveal that it was blood, and that it matched Mrs. Hearin's blood type. A Jackson police detective interviewed Robert Hearin. They wanted to know if he or his wife had ever been threatened.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
He had no idea who would want to harm
It
them.
was there for me to find. It's a ransom.
If Mrs. Hearin were without her medication for long, her intestinal condition would become critical.
It was folded just like that.
Kidnapping is a crime that must be solved quickly, or the chances of rescuing the victim are slim. That evening, Jackson police contacted Special Agent Patrick McGlennon of the FBI's Jackson Field Office to bring the resources of the federal government to bear right away.
Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI has jurisdiction whenever an individual is kidnapped in the United States. The presumption in this case, of course, was a kidnapping had occurred, a ransom demand had been made, and the possibility of travel interstate is in fact why the FBI gets involved in these types of matters.
The FBI called U.S. Attorney James Tucker, who would advise investigators in legal matters as the case developed. Like most residents of Jackson, Tucker had great admiration for the Heirins.
Robert Hearin was a self-made man, and at the time of this incident, which was 1988, Mr. Hearin was probably considered one of the foremost financial wizards here in the Jackson area. He was well known in the business community. He was a generous person, so he was becoming well known for his particular acts of generosity.
By dawn the next day, FBI agents and evidence technicians arrived at the Heirins' home. The Jackson police detective filled in the case agent on what they'd learned so far. The FBI set up a satellite command post at the residence and tapped the Heirins' phone, ready to trace any ransom calls. There was little doubt that multi-millionaire Robert Hearin was the real target. Yet Mr. Hearin hadn't been told what to pay to get his wife back.
It was impossible to comply, or nearly impossible to comply, with the demands because they were nonspecific in nature. Mrs. Hearin was not even mentioned in the note. There was no provision for her safe return.
The note did say that the 12 men listed had been involved in the same photography company. Robert Hearin explained that he had once served as chairman of the board for that company. Some of the company's franchisees had been sued to recoup losses, but Hearin did not know which ones. It seemed unlikely that the 12 men named had kidnapped Mrs. Hearin, but perhaps one or more of them was striking back at the company through Robert Hearin. Technicians collected samples of all the writing pads and paper in the Heirins' home. They would compare the paper to the ransom note to see if it had been written on the stock from the house. The results would take a few days. Investigators searched outside the house for hairs, blood, clothing, anything that might reveal the kidnapper's identity. They looked for cigarette butts or evidence of food or drink, signs that someone had been watching the house. They found nothing.
Yesterday afternoon,
Neighbors and domestic workers reported seeing nothing strange at the house the previous afternoon, and no one had seen Mrs. Hearin leave.
Quiet neighborhood, we should.
The next day, agents continued canvassing the Heirins' neighborhood.
Dr. Posey?
They questioned a doctor who lived down the street.
Detective Johnson, Jackson Police Department would like to
He said that he had seen something in the neighborhood recently that might be related to the kidnapping. 2 weeks earlier, the doctor was going to run errands when he drove past a white van parked near his house. From that position, anyone in the van would have a clear view of the Hearin house.
Around here? Yeah, about 50 blocks.
At first, the doctor thought nothing of it. But when he'd returned home hours later, the van was still there. Thinking the driver needed help, the doctor offered his assistance.
Can I help you with anything? Wondering if you need some help.
The driver responded by asking if there was a law against parking in the neighborhood. It was an odd response, enough to make the doctor remember the incident.
Thank you, sir. If you think of anything else...
He said the van drove away minutes later.
Thank you, Dr. Posey.
Agents continued to canvass the Hearin's neighborhood and found another neighbor who had seen a white van on the street 3 months earlier.
The other neighbor had seen a van similar to that described by the first individual, sitting almost directly in front of the Hearin residence in the very earliest days of April of 1988. She was suspicious enough of the van to get the license plate number.
If investigators could find that van, they might also find Mrs. Hearin. But a computer check revealed that the license plate had been stolen from a car at the New Orleans airport. It was another dead end. After 36 hours of investigation and no ransom calls, agents hoped lab results on the note would provide a fresh lead to Mrs. Hearin or her abductor. FBI examiners first determined that the note had been typed on paper foreign to the Hearin's home. They also compared the typeface to known samples from every typewriter made in this century.
The laboratory division was able to determine that the demand letter was in fact typed by a Royal typewriter manufactured between 1912 and 1927. There was nothing else contained on the demand letter which would give analysts any type of ability to tell us the manufacturer of the paper or whether there were any indented writing or other evidence on the letter.
A latent fingerprint examination revealed nothing, and a spot on the note believed to be a bloodstain was too small to analyze. Although no evidence on the note helped agents, they hoped its message would. The note demanded that Robert Hearin pay 12 men who were involved with a photography company. Perhaps the kidnapper was among them. Agents learned that the company had foreclosed on each of the 12 men, all former franchisees, to collect heavy debts. One of the company's executives provided the FBI with company files and photos of those men.
Are you going to have to take those with you?
Yes, sir.
One was now deceased. The others were scattered throughout the country.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
At the FBI's Jackson field office, agents split up the 11 names and began to review the files and photographs. They sent leads to FBI offices in the towns and cities where the men currently lived, requesting additional information. Agents found that many had financial troubles. They tried to ascertain if those men had traveled near the Hearin neighborhood when the white van was spotted there, and again recently when the kidnapping occurred. FBI agents across the country began covert surveillance on the former franchisees. They hoped one of the men would lead them to the ailing 73-year-old woman. But as the kidnapping investigation stretched into its third day, only 7 days remained on the ransom note deadline, and agents still lacked instructions on how to recover Annie Laurie Hearin alive.
Hi, how are you, ma'am?
3 days had passed since Annie Laurie Hearin, an elderly grandmother, had been abducted from her Jackson, Mississippi home in broad daylight. The FBI continued surveillance on 11 men named in the ransom note found inside the Hearin's home. Agents couldn't confront the men. A frightened kidnapper might harm the victim. Special Agent Patrick McGlennon hoped one of them would lead to the missing woman.
We wanted to determine if they were traveling even small distances from their residences or business. We wanted to see if they perhaps were keeping Mrs. Hearin at a remote location where they might have to provide food, water, other conveniences for her, that they wouldn't want to be too far away from the victim.
Despite the efforts of dozens of agents around the country, they discovered no direct leads to Mrs. Hearin's whereabouts. But they still resisted contacting the 11 men directly so as not to reveal the investigation. The FBI considered the possibility that the kidnapper might be someone other than the men listed on the note. Agents contacted the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia for assistance. Profilers in the unit are agents trained to determine characteristics of criminals from the details of a case. One profiler reviewed the evidence, particularly the ransom note, looking for indications of the kidnapper's psychological makeup. The profiler called in his findings to the Jackson FBI agents working the Hearin kidnapping.
You mind if I put you on speakerphone so we can all listen at one time? All right, go ahead.
In the conference call, the profiler confirmed that the kidnapper was likely one of the 11 suspects currently under surveillance.
Which nobody else would ever use. So.
And since all those men had at least some college education, he believed one of them had intentionally misspelled words and used an old typewriter to throw off investigators.
He has a fixation.
The profiler said the abduction was an act of revenge against Robert Hearin by a paranoid individual who was willing to kill.
The Behavioral Science Unit believed that a sole perpetrator was responsible for this crime, that it would be a white male of approximate middle age, and that the individual would probably be working alone, although if they were working in concert with someone else, that person would provide a very subordinate role.
It's bad.
The profiler also concluded that by this time, there was only a 50% chance that Annie Hearin was still alive. One further detail caught the profiler's eye, a phrase that did not seem to match the rest of the note and might point to the profession of the kidnapper.
The note said, "Pay them whatever damages are owed to them. If any is dead, pay their children." Damages is a legal term. It was telling in that one of the individuals on that demand note was an attorney.
Special Agent Tom Montgomery of the FBI's Jacksonville, Florida office was called in to investigate the attorney listed on the note, a man named N. Alfred Winn.
After we received the name of N. Alfred Winn, we did the public record background checks. We also contacted the St. Petersburg Police Department, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, found that he had no criminal record, did our own computer checks also. We determined that he was a St. Petersburg attorney and that he lived above his office.
Yeah. What's this all about?
Well, I'm investigating a crime.
An agent went to interview Winn at his office residence.
So, Mr. Winn, you were camping at the girlfriend.
Alfred Winn said he had nothing to do with the kidnapping and explained where he was on July 26th, the day Mrs. Hearin went missing. He had been at a bar with a prostitute. He said that on that evening he had called his paralegal back at the office.
Thanks.
He asked the employee to meet him at the bar to lend him $100 so he could go home with the prostitute.
Big time. How about you?
The paralegal promised to be right over. Winn said he and the prostitute went outside. He stalled for time as he waited for his paralegal to show up with the money. The two were in Winn's car when his assistant arrived.
Hey, Doc. Hey, way to go.
Winn took the money, then left with the prostitute. Winn said he didn't remember much about the evening. He didn't know the name of the bar or the prostitute's real name. The next day, agents checked the alibi with Winn's paralegal when the attorney was out of the office. He corroborated his boss's story and also claimed that he didn't know the bar's name since he had never been there before or since. Agents suspected both men were lying.
We learned that Winn had paid for the paralegal schooling at a local community college, his paralegal schooling. We had learned that he was working for basically a very minimum salary, and there was a lot of allegiance between the paralegal and Mr. Winn.
Later, an agent re-interviewed Winn's paralegal, explaining their suspicions. He maintained that he had met Winn at the bar on the same day of the kidnapping, though he did reveal something new about his boss. He said that Winn's legal battle with the photography company had begun when the company foreclosed on him 7 years earlier, and that he had fought the lawsuit with a vengeance. He had attempted to declare bankruptcy 3 times in order to avoid paying his debts. Under a court order to recover the money, the U.S. Marshal's Office had confiscated Winn's valuables, including 1,000 shares of expensive stock. They also impounded Winn's European sports coupe, a car the paralegal said Winn loved. In addition, they put his St. Petersburg office up for auction. On July 6, 1988, less than 3 weeks before Mrs. Hearin disappeared, Winn had been notified of an eviction hearing. But he had refused to leave. The paralegal said that Winn had been furious, believing that the photography company had ruined his life.
Going to get that date from me? You're going to check that
The
date?
FBI wondered if the paralegal had been involved in the kidnapping.
Okay. All right, thanks.
We pulled all vehicles registered to the paralegal, friends and associates of Mr. Winn, to include Mr. Winn, and learned that the paralegal had a white van registered to him, and through an interview of the paralegal learned that the vehicle was utilized by Winn on several occasions.
It seemed to be a major breakthrough in the case. The vehicle identification number revealed the name of the previous owner. An agent went to interview her.
You're right, it's just like you said.
He didn't return until...
She said Alfred Winn, not his paralegal, had been the actual buyer. She said that Winn had acted strangely. He was adamant that his name not be written on the title. So the woman left the line for the buyer's name blank. The lead was promising, but then agents learned that the van had been in the repair shop on the day of the kidnapping.
Okay, how long was he gone?
It was one more frustration in a difficult case. After more than a week, the FBI and U.S. Attorney James Tucker were no closer to finding Mrs. Hearin.
A case like this is extremely difficult when you don't have an eyewitness to any one of several situations. We did not have an eyewitness as to the abduction itself. We did not have an eyewitness that Newton Alfred Winn or any of the other people listed in the particular note had ever been in Mrs. Herin's company.
At the Jackson, Mississippi police station, investigators again met with the doctor who had seen a white van in the Herin's neighborhood.
Go through those and see if there's anybody you recognize.
They hoped he could recognize the driver in a photo lineup.
Short here.
The neighbor quickly picked out the photo of Alfred Winn. He was certain it was Winn he saw reading a map in a white van across the street from his house in mid-July, less than 2 weeks before Mrs. Herin's abduction. The other neighbor, who had seen a similar van, also identified Winn as the driver. It was clear to agents that Alfred Winn was connected to the kidnapping of Annie Hearin, yet they didn't know how.
Thank you very much.
We thought, because of the positive identification, that Winn was definitely somehow involved in the kidnapping. If not the actual perpetrator, if not the man who walked up to the door and actually grabbed Mrs. Hearin, he certainly was directing or calling the shots.
Yep.
FBI agents kept Winn under surveillance. They believed that he could lead them to the missing woman. But as the deadline in the ransom note approached, hopes of finding the frail Mrs. Hearin dimmed further. The day after the deadline in a ransom note, FBI agents and local detectives briefed the husband of kidnapped Jackson, Mississippi socialite Annie Hearin in preparation for a televised appeal for his ailing wife's return.
We'll be able to do it. Okay, thank you.
The note hadn't outlined specific steps to earn Mrs. Herin's release. FBI behavioral profilers hoped the press conference would prompt the kidnapper to contact Mr. Herin with instructions to get his wife back unharmed. With his son and daughter at his side, Robert Herin asked anyone with any information to come forward.
As a businessman,
he also spoke directly to the kidnapper, promising to follow any specific instructions. A week later, the plan seemed to have worked. On August 15th, 1988, Robert Herin spotted the familiar handwriting of his wife among his mail. The envelope was postmarked August 12th from Atlanta, Georgia. Investigators were careful not to destroy any evidence that might have been left on it. Mr. Herin believed the letter was in his wife's handwriting, too. FBI lab examiners later confirmed that it was. In the letter, Mrs. Herin begged her husband to do what the kidnappers wanted, or they would seal her up in a cellar with only a few jugs of water. Though the letter provided no instructions on how to comply, for Special Agent Patrick McGlennon, it did bring new encouragement just when all hope of recovering Mrs. Herin alive seemed lost.
When we received the August 15th letter, which was in Mrs. Herin's handwriting, it really lifted the spirits of everybody that was involved in the case. We felt reasonably sure that she was in good enough condition to write the letter, and we were going to get her back the same way.
The letter itself had been dated August 10th, 15 days after the abduction. Yet no one could be sure Mrs. Herin was alive on that date. It was unclear if she had written the letter on her own, or if the message was coerced, according to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery.
Certain words utilized on the letter, "seal me up in the cellar with jugs of water." In talking to family members, we found out that those are not words that she would normally utilize. She would have used the word basement or bottles of water. So it is our belief that the letter was dictated to her.
If the letter had been dictated, both the message and the date could be false. Having to guess at what exactly he should do, Mr. Herin wrote checks to all the men listed in the original ransom note, according to U.S. Attorney James Tucker.
He had already instructed his people to make efforts to determine what financial situations he had had with each of the people that were listed in the original note. So he had some idea at that particular point about how much money had been involved with each of those people.
Mr. Herin settled on restitution, roughly equivalent to the amount the men had been ordered to pay in their franchise lawsuits. The total came to almost $1 million. Herin sent $145,000 to the prime suspect, Alfred Winn. Enclosed with each check was a note requesting the safe return of his wife. The FBI instructed the Postal Service to deliver the envelopes the next day. Later, agents spoke with Winn's paralegal and learned of the attorney's reaction to Mr. Herin's check.
When Mr. Winn received his check in Tampa, Florida, he opened it, read the contents of the letter from Mr. Herin, turned to his paralegal and stated, "This is not what I wanted."
He told his paralegal that what he had wanted was to get his life back, the return of his confiscated car, jewelry, and other property. Winn sent back the check with a note enclosed, saying he hoped Mrs. Herin would be returned safely. Agents now believe that Alfred Winn had kidnapped Mrs. Hearin for revenge against the photography company Hearin once chaired, not for monetary gain. That meant it was less likely Mrs. Hearin would ever be returned alive. Although some of the people receiving checks kept the money, most returned similar responses.
Some of the people that Mr. Hearin sent these checks to sent the checks immediately back to him, sent letters or called on the telephone, expressing their regret to Mr. Hearin that something like this could happen to his wife. They wanted nothing to do with the money, and they weren't going to benefit through his grief.
2.5 months passed without further word from Annie Hearin's kidnapper. Considering her fragile health, chances were slim she would survive this long. In early November 1988, the case was featured on a national crime-solving television series. Agents around the country chased each of hundreds of leads called in. One call from a woman in Florida seemed especially promising. Although none of the names on the ransom note had been broadcast, she said that if Alfred Winn were on the list, she had important information. The FBI learned that the Florida woman was a spiritual advisor, which did not initially bolster confidence among agents.
Special Agent Montgomery from the FBI. We spoke on the phone.
But after a brief interview, they realized she had a strong reputation in the law enforcement field, having often assisted police in the past.
I recognized some of the information that he...
The advisor told an agent she had first met N. Alfred Winn 4 years earlier. In 1984, he had his first consultation, asking her advice about problems he had with the head of a photography company, the same company mentioned in the Hearin ransom note.
She instructed him to pursue his problems through the court system and take legal means, and he told her that he had already done that, and it just didn't work.
That's the big problem. That is the biggest
Winn
problem.
said he wanted to kidnap the head of the company and hold him hostage until he got what he wanted. He had the perfect place to put the man and said that he was looking for someone to help him. He called her a month and a half later to ask if she would help.
Besides, I go without risking losing these clients. Trying to get new clients.
She declined.
It's tough too,
The advisor provided the FBI with records of her work with Winn. Once assured agents would protect her, she agreed to become a cooperating witness and promised to contact Winn to arrange a meeting.
Anything else, or if you want to talk to me, if you want to think of anything at all that might be helpful, please give me a
FBI technicians would wire her office for sound and video.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Our plan was to draw Mr. Winn into a face-to-face meeting with her and to have them discuss their prior discussions of this kidnapping of Mr. Hearin, as well as any of the other things that would verify exactly what he had said to her during their prior meetings.
Alfred Winn took the bait. The monitored meeting took place in early December 1988. FBI agents watched as Winn approached the office. Agents hoped he would reveal the whereabouts of the missing woman. The advisor told Winn she had seen the crime show on television and asked if he had kidnapped Annie Hearin.
FBI one, can you hear him in there?
Winn denied it, adding that he had decided not to abduct Robert Hearin as he had previously discussed with the advisor. The recording corroborated the advisor's statement, but it didn't provide agents with the evidence needed to arrest Alfred Winn. When Winn left the office, FBI agents followed him.
We hoped a meeting between Mr. Winn and the psychic would lead him to, at the very least, check on the location of Mrs. Hearin's body or lead us to a co-conspirator.
But the suspect never went to visit a place where the body could have been kept. Weeks later, agents learned that Winn owned a cabin in Florida's swampland, a perfect place to hide a body. Dead or alive, agents hoped they'd find Annie Hearin there. They had no way of knowing if the house was booby-trapped or if someone was armed and waiting inside. 6 months after 73-year-old Annie Hearin was kidnapped in Mississippi, FBI agents hoped to find her in a remote Florida cabin owned by prime suspect Alfred Winn. A message from the kidnapper had threatened that the elderly woman would be sealed alive in a cellar. But agents found no cellar. The police was empty of anything related to the kidnapping. FBI Special Agent Patrick McGlennon and other investigators continued searching for the kidnapped woman nearby.
We began to look in dry cisterns, some swamp area adjacent to those properties, the outbuildings, screened porches, whatever structures existed. We found no sign of Mrs. Hearin, and no sign that anybody had ever stayed there for any length of time. Certainly no cellars. There were no cellars in that section of Florida.
Annie Hearin was still missing and presumed dead. Then, in late July of 1989, Alfred Winn sent a filing cabinet to the IRS, challenging them to find disputed financial documents.
All right, guys, we got the filing cabinet we could wait on Winn from the IRS. Go ahead, move it in there, please. Okay, that's good right there.
But he failed to check the cabinet thoroughly, and his arrogance would bring him down.
Winn, we believe, sent those thousands of documents to Internal Revenue Service as part of an effort to intimidate them into leaving him alone. That was a pattern that the agents discovered in regard to Winn conduct in a number of situations. His arrogance was demonstrated in his efforts to overpower whoever he was involved with at any particular point.
When they found letters regarding a kidnapping and murder plot, IRS agents called the FBI. The documents outlined how Winn and a former girlfriend had been planning to kidnap and kill the woman's husband. According to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery, the similarities to Annie Herin's abduction were obvious.
They mentioned utilizing an old typewriter to type a communication, and the first ransom note for Annie Laurie Hearin was typed on an old 1920s vintage typewriter. They also mentioned detailed maps, surveillance of the area. They also mentioned that it was actually Winn that was going to do the crime, and the female was just going to help him and obtain what he needed.
FBI agents tracked down Winn's ex-girlfriend at the community college where she worked. They needed to question her about the plot outlined in the letters. At first, she claimed she knew nothing about the plot. But when reminded that interfering with an investigation was itself a crime, she decided to cooperate.
The last time you saw him was a few years ago?
She said the plot to kill her husband was Winn's idea. When she realized he was serious, she had broken up with Winn.
6 months ago. Mailed it from Miami?
Agents asked if she had had any contact with him since then. She said that a year earlier, in early August 1988, Winn had asked her to meet him at a motel in DeLand, Florida. It was just days after Annie Hearin had been kidnapped. Winn acted paranoid, silently handing her a note that asked if her car was bugged and if she'd been followed. When he was convinced it was safe, he began talking.
What's this all about?
Winn asked her to mail a letter for him, offering her $500 plus travel expenses.
First of all, did I touch it?
She agreed, and he paid her half in advance, $250. Winn handed her an envelope wrapped in a gray linen napkin. Then he gave her very specific instructions. She was not to touch the envelope or even look at the address. Winn ordered her to mail it from Atlanta, buy the airline tickets under a false name, and fly into and out of 2 different airports. He instructed her to change her appearance before the trip. She complied, changing her clothes, jewelry, and hair in the women's restroom at the airport. Once in Atlanta, she was to mail the envelope precisely on August 11th. But the woman told agents it was late in the day when she made it to a mailbox. At the last moment, she said she couldn't resist a glance at the address. The letter, allegedly sent by Annie Hearin, was postmarked on August 12th from Atlanta. Agents showed the woman a photo of the envelope Robert Hearin had received. She immediately recognized the distinctive handwriting. It was the envelope she had mailed. She said that she had thrown away the napkin used to carry the envelope on a rural road. She offered to take them there once she finished work. That evening, she brought the agents to the area. Investigators knew there was little chance they would find the napkin on the roadside after more than a year, but they looked anyway. They needed it to corroborate her story. Against all odds, they found it. But they wanted an admission in Alfred Winn's own words. With a solid cooperating witness, agents were getting closer to arresting Winn. At the FBI's request, Winn's ex-girlfriend agreed to be wired for an audio-taped meeting between herself and Winn.
We had hoped that Mr. Winn would discuss facets of the crime, that he would tell her what she had accomplished by sending the letter to the Hearin residence, that he would thank her for her help, that he would pay her.
The woman called Winn and set up a meeting. Agents had instructed her to try to draw Winn out about the trip to Atlanta. As hoped, Winn gave his ex-girlfriend the $250 he still owed her for mailing the envelope. Winn refused to talk in detail about his plan, and he never mentioned Annie Hearin. He seemed to have stonewalled investigators again. Convinced he was involved and desperate to find Mrs. Hearin, the FBI knew they had to arrest Winn soon. On March 11th, 1989, the FBI was ready to arrest suspected kidnapper Alfred Winn. They set up a second meeting with Winn's former girlfriend who had begun cooperating with authorities. The ex-girlfriend had been wired so agents could record the conversation. They hoped Winn would say something incriminating about the kidnapping of Annie Hearin so they could charge him and recover Mrs. Hearin or her body. FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery had coached the informant on how to deal with Winn in this crucial second meeting.
We had instructed her to become more aggressive in this meeting and to basically indicate to him that she was aware that she was involved in a criminal act, that she'd been watching television, and that she now realized that the letter that she mailed may in fact be involved in the kidnapping, may have been a second ransom note, hoping to elicit from him something to incriminate him further.
Agents watched and listened as the woman pushed Winn about the Hearin kidnapping. The suspect soon became defensive and left the car without admitting any knowledge of the crime.
He's pulling out. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Agents knew it was time to make their move. The element of surprise is critical to a safe arrest. Alfred Winn was charged with conspiracy to kidnap, mailing a threatening communication, and perjury for testifying in front of a grand jury that he wasn't involved in the kidnapping. But agents still had no solid proof that he or an accomplice had in fact abducted Annie Hearin. In Winn's car, agents discovered several maps of Mississippi, one with a Jackson exit marked on it in pen and notes in the margin. Agents thought these might indicate where Mrs. Hearin's body had been placed, but extensive searches yielded nothing. Securing a warrant, Florida FBI agents searched Winn's office. They needed physical evidence to prove Winn was involved in the abduction of Annie Laurie Hearin. Their hopes rose when they spotted a vintage typewriter. Special Agent McGlennon recalled that FBI examiners had determined the ransom note was typed on a 1920s-era Royal typewriter, the exact model recovered from Winn's office.
This seemed to be a very significant break. In my mind, this was the typewriter upon which Winn typed the initial demand note that was left in the Hearin's home. We sent it to the lab, fully expecting them to come back with a report saying, this is the exact typewriter that composed that letter.
The FBI lab determined that the typewriter found in Winn's office was not the one used to type the ransom note. Agents believed Winn had planted a different typewriter to bring doubt to later prosecution. They had also found a business card for a van rental company in Winn's office.
How you doing?
The company owner said Alfred Winn had rented white vans 3 times.
I'm the manager. Okay.
Each time he had driven more than 500 miles, just 100 miles more than the round trip to the Hearin's residence.
Yes, I do, but I don't have a computer.
The rental times did not coincide with the date of the abduction, but one did match the date when Alfred Winn was sighted in the Hearin's neighborhood. U.S. Attorney James Tucker had little evidence to prove his case. He believed that Winn and his paralegal were lying about the suspect being with a prostitute on the day of the kidnapping.
We went back and confronted the paralegal with this false alibi. The agents and I had a heart-to-heart talk with him, at which he decided that he better tell us that all that was a lie, and that Mr. Winn had in fact been out of his law offices and out of pocket during the entire time that the abduction occurred, which would have been the crucial dates, the 24th through about the 28th.
This would help prove perjury, but it wasn't enough to charge Winn with the crime they were certain he had committed, the kidnapping and murder of Annie Laurie Hearin. The federal trial for conspiracy to kidnap began in Mississippi on January 29, 1990.
Throughout the investigation and the 2-week trial, which occurred in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Winn professed his innocence. But at the conclusion, a jury of his peers found him guilty for the crimes for which he was charged.
N. Alfred Winn received the maximum sentence allowed: 19 years and 7 months for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He has no chance of parole from the federal prison in Coleman, Florida.
We have never to this day resolved where Mrs. Hearin is now, and the family deserves to know that. In fact, as far as this office is concerned, we still carry this as an open matter, and will continue to do so until such time as somebody steps forward and helps us out with locating where Mrs. Hearin is. Family deserves it.
Mr. Robert Hearin died of a heart attack on November 28, 1990. In May of 1991, Mrs. Annie Laurie Hearin was declared dead to allow the settlement of the couple's estate. The Hearin family still hopes to someday learn what happened to their mother, to begin to heal their pain, and to finally lay her to rest.